No one wakes up thinking, today I'm going to be manipulated. And yet it happens every day. At work, in relationships, in seemingly harmless conversations. The uncomfortable truth, and almost no one dares to say it, is that many people obey without realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they have been trained to react emotionally, while others play a colder game. Machiavelli warned centuries ago, politics should be guided by reality, not by ideals. Ignoring this doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you predictable. Here's a statement that disturbs but liberates. Whoever controls their emotions controls more than they imagine. While you try to be fair, transparent, and well-intentioned, someone on the other side has already understood that the end justifies the means when the goal is influence. It's not about shouting, ordering, or imposing. It's about rhythm, silence, ambiguity, and human interpretation. It's better to be feared than loved, as long as you know how to avoid being hated. True power rarely makes noise. It reorganizes the environment from within. What if I told you that there are mental patterns so effective they work in any situation? Casual conversation, negotiation, conflict, or leadership. And that almost no one teaches you because they're too simple and too dangerous. Today, you'll understand how these mechanisms operate, why people obey without realizing it, and how to develop a strategically unreadable posture based on decisions aligned with real human nature. It's not cheap manipulation, it's applied awareness. And once you see this, you'll never react the same way again. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos. It's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You're not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. An experienced strategist learns early on that attacks rarely come in the form of open confrontation. Those who understand Machiavelli's logic know that the enemy's true objective is not to destroy them, but to penetrate their inner self, access emotions, provoke reactions, and from there guide decisions. It's politics guided by reality, not ideals. No one needs to defeat you publicly if they can disrupt you internally. And the curious thing is that this almost never seems like an attack. It comes disguised as advice, excessive concern, or a harmless joke, always an appearance of virtue. While you believe you are dealing with good intentions, someone is merely mapping your emotional triggers. That's how the game begins, not with shouts, but with small psychological nudges. Those who react too quickly reveal the map of their own minds. And once that map exists, the enemy no longer needs force, just subtle pressure, the calculated use of emotional force applied at the right point. Observe how this plays out in everyday life. At work, for example, it's not the colleague who disagrees outright who represents a danger, but the one who always starts a conversation when you're tired, irritated, or insecure. They ask questions that seem neutral, but seek to test boundaries. They want to know what affects you, what destabilizes you, where you over-explain yourself. Machiavelli would call this decisions based on real human nature. Emotions are predictable when provoked in the right way. That's why direct conflict is inefficient. It generates resistance. Emotional access, on the other hand, creates dependence, guilt, and anxiety. And here comes a silent rule. The more you try to be loved, the more material you offer. It's better to be feared than loved, as long as you know how to avoid being hated. The modern enemy doesn't want your immediate downfall. They want your unconscious cooperation. That's why great strategists build their own loyal armies within themselves. Self-control, clarity, and a cold reading of the situation. They understand that virtue and fortune go hand in hand. Inner preparation meets external opportunity. When someone tries to pull you into the emotional field, the common mistake is believing you need to clarify everything, justify everything, explain intentions, and without realizing it, you give them access. The experienced mentor observes in silence and lets the other speak. Every word from the opponent reveals intention, rhythm, anxiety. Constant adaptability begins here, understanding that the game is not about winning arguments, but about not offering emotional leverage. Those who master this realize something unsettling and liberating. If the enemy needs to get inside you to act, perhaps the next step is learning not to open the door. The experienced mentor often says something simple yet uncomfortable. Every emotional reaction is a leak of information. When someone provokes you and you respond impulsively, you're not just reacting, you're confessing. Confessing what affects you, where it hurts, what throws you off balance. Machiavelli would never ignore this, because politics guided by reality, not ideals, starts from the principle that exposed emotions become weapons. The enemy doesn't need to imagine your limits when you demonstrate them in real time. A curt response, an overly long text, an anxious explanation, all of this reveals patterns, and patterns are strategic gold. The end justifies the means when the objective is control, and emotional reaction is the cheapest and most effective means that exists. Those who learn not to react begin to dismantle the game without needing to confront anyone. Imagine a typical, everyday argument. Someone throws out a sharp, seemingly casual comment, but it's venomous enough to get under your skin. Most people react by trying to defend themselves, prove a point, clarify their intentions, but in doing so, they enter exactly the territory the other person wanted. Better to be feared than loved, in this case means being predictably calm, silent, unwavering. Avoiding being hated isn't about pleasing, it's about not offering an emotional spectacle. In professional environments, for example, responding to a provocative email hours later with few lines and a neutral tone usually has more impact than an immediate and emotional response. Calculated use of force here means calculated use of time and words. Whoever reacts less controls more. Great strategists develop a kind of internal, loyal army, the habit of pausing, breathing, observing. They know that decisions based on real human nature require momentary detachment. This isn't emotional repression, it's a strategic choice. Virtù and fortuna meet when you realize that not every provocation requires a response. Some require only silence and memory. Because every time you react, you teach the other person how to manipulate you. And when you don't react, you create an uncomfortable, almost offensive void for the one who expected control. Constant adaptability isn't about changing your mind all the time, but about adjusting your behavior to avoid being predictable. And when the opponent realizes they can no longer manipulate you emotionally, something shifts in the air. As if a new form of pressure is about to emerge. There's a common mistake among those who don't yet understand the game, believing that silence is absence. For the strategist, silence is action, and a very uncomfortable one at that. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, relies on what the other cannot control. When you remain silent at the expected moment of response, you create an empty space that the opponent needs to fill. And human beings hate emptiness. The appearance of virtue often involves talking too much, explaining too much, justifying too much. But well-placed silence breaks this logic. It shifts the center of tension to the one who provoked it. The enemy begins to wonder, did he notice? Is he ignoring it? Is he planning something? This internal noise is the calculated use of psychological force without raising your voice, without moving a visible piece on the board. In practice, this appears in simple situations. A provocative message goes unanswered. A meeting ends without you offering an immediate opinion. A veiled attack receives only a neutral look and no explanation. For those who make a living controlling other people's reactions, this is maddening. Better to be feared than loved here means being unpredictably silent. Avoiding being hated doesn't require justifying yourself, but rather avoiding humiliation. Silence doesn't confront, it suspends, and in this suspension, the other person begins to project their own fears. Decisions based on real human nature recognize that the mind tries to fill in the gaps, usually with the worst possible scenario. Virtù and fortuna appear when you understand that the right silence at the right moment weighs more than any brilliant argument. The most refined strategists train this as one strengthens their own loyal armies, little by little, with consistency. It's not about disappearing or becoming inaccessible, but about choosing when not to react. Constant adaptability means knowing that not all silence is the same. Some protect, others pressure. A simple example, in negotiations, whoever speaks first after a proposal usually loses an advantage. Whoever maintains silence forces the other to move, to offer more, to expose themselves. The end justifies the means when the means is to let the other tire of their own anxiety. And when this silence begins to generate too much discomfort, the opponent tends to accelerate, make mistakes, reveal intentions. That's when you realize that the next step isn't to speak, it's to control something even more subtle: time. Few people realize it, but almost every strategic defeat begins with haste. Whoever dictates the pace dictates the hierarchy, and this is not an opinion. It's politics guided by reality, not ideals. Machiavelli understood that urgency rarely favors those who react. It benefits those who provoked it. When someone tries to rush you, they don't want speed, they want error. They want you to decide before thinking, respond before observing, commit before understanding. The appearance of virtue often confuses agility with efficiency. The strategist knows that time is territory, and poorly defended territory becomes an invasion. The end justifies the means when the means is to slow down while the other accelerates. This reverses the game without direct confrontation, using only control of the pace. In everyday life, this appears almost invisibly. I need this now, decide quickly, this is the last chance. Those who master decisions based on real human nature recognize the trick. Artificial urgency creates anxiety, and anxiety generates concessions. Better to be feared than loved here means not yielding to someone else's timeline. Avoiding being hated isn't about saying no bluntly, but about saying, "I'll think about it." In negotiations, for example, responding that you need a day to analyze already repositions the table. Calculated use of force, in this case, is calculated use of delay. Virtù and fortuna meet when you realize that those who can wait usually receive better conditions, or reveal the other's desperation. Strategists build their own loyal armies over time. Clear agendas, intentional pauses, and responses outside the expected pattern. Constant adaptability isn't about chasing after everything, but about choosing when not to. A simple example. Someone provokes you expecting an immediate response. You respond later, calmly, and with few words. The psychological impact is enormous. The other person feels they've lost control of the pace. And when the pace slips, mistakes, exaggerations, and insistence arise. The silence already exerted pressure. Now, time amplifies that pressure. The opponent begins to move without you pushing them. And it is at this point that a delicate opportunity arises to break expectations, something few know how to do without exposing themselves too much. Nothing makes someone more vulnerable than being predictable. When the enemy manages to anticipate your moves, they've already won half the game. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands pattern recognition, and those who repeat patterns become tools. Those who appear virtuous tend to always act the same way, respond the same way, react the same way, explain themselves the same way. The strategist does the opposite. They understand that breaking expectations isn't being chaotic, it's being strategically irregular. The end justifies the means when the means is denying the other person a sense of control. Those who expect an emotional reaction and find calm become disorganized. Those who expect confrontation and find indifference lose their balance. Virtù and fortuna appear when you realize that the unexpected, well-balanced, dismantles silent plans. In practice, this can be simple. If someone expects you to defend yourself, you partially agree and end the conversation. If they expect silence, you respond briefly and neutrally. If they expect speed, you take your time. Decisions based on real human nature recognize that the brain seeks predictability to feel secure. Taking this away from the opponent creates instability. Better to be feared than loved. Here means not being too easily readable. Avoiding being hated is not about pleasing, it's about not humiliating. A classic example in professional environments. When everyone is heatedly discussing a problem, the strategist observes silently and speaks only at the end, with an unexpected synthesis. This repositions authority without direct confrontation. Calculated use of force is knowing when to appear and when to disappear. Great players build their own loyal armies of flexible behaviors. Constant adaptability isn't inconsistency, it's reading the situation. They know that when the other believes they already understand you, the game becomes dangerous. Therefore, they alter the rhythm, the tone, the response. Not to confuse out of vanity, but to protect. Silence has already applied pressure, time has already shifted. Now the breaking of expectations disarms. The opponent begins to make wrong predictions, to invest energy in hypotheses, to lose focus. And when this happens, something curious emerges. They try to force a closure, a definitive answer, a final point that returns control to them. And it is precisely there that the next move gains strength. Few things wear down the human mind more than the absence of closure. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, exploits the psychological need for conclusion. When you deny a clear outcome, the other party remains trapped, ruminating on scenarios, reviewing statements, trying to solve something that no longer depends on them. The appearance of virtue always seeks to clarify, finalize, resolve once and for all. The strategist does the opposite. They consciously leave loose ends. The end justifies the means when the means is to keep the adversary mentally occupied while you remain unscathed. It's not cruelty. It's an understanding of real human nature. Those who need quick closure are usually emotionally vulnerable. In practice, this appears when someone demands final explanations, definitive answers, absolute positions. The strategist offers something incomplete, neutral, open. A phrase like, "Let's see how this develops," or "It's not the time to decide," creates immediate discomfort. Better to be feared than loved here means being unreachable in terms of psychological control. Avoiding being hated means not provoking directly. It's simply not satisfying the other person's anxiety. Decisions based on real human nature recognize that the mind hates uncertainty, and the more the other tries to close the narrative, the more energy they lose. Calculated use of force is letting time erode the opponent's obsession. The most refined strategists build their own loyal armies in the narrative field as well. They know when to end and especially when not to. Constant adaptability means understanding that not every dialogue needs a conclusion. In negotiations, for example, leaving a proposal open forces the other side to improve terms, reveal limits, or commit excesses. Virtù and fortuna align when you understand that mental collapse rarely comes from attacks. It comes from continuous attrition. Silence, time, and broken expectations have already created enough tension. Now the absence of closure pushes the opponent towards bad decisions. And when that happens, a new position emerges, one in which you can no longer be touched in the same way. True strategic victory isn't about winning arguments or silencing enemies. It's about becoming unreachable by them. Machiavelli never romanticized external strength without internal control. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, begins when external stimuli no longer determine your internal direction. Psychological untouchability arises when the other realizes they can no longer move, provoke, or lead you. The appearance of virtue is often confused with excessive sensitivity, feeling everything, reacting to everything, justifying everything. The strategist learns to filter. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve mental clarity in chaotic environments. Whoever can no longer affect you emotionally loses any lever of control, and this isn't announced, it manifests in behavior. In practice, this means that criticism no longer inflames, praise no longer intoxicates, and provocations no longer deflect. Decisions based on real human nature recognize that most people react seeking validation or defense. The strategist observes without absorbing. Better to be feared than loved here means being emotionally self-sufficient. Avoiding being hated doesn't require bowing down, but rather not retaliating. A simple example. When someone tries to destabilize you with irony or pressure, you respond with functional neutrality, without theatrical coldness, without emotional heat. Calculated use of force is knowing when not to use any. Virtù and fortuna align when your inner stability creates silent authority. Great strategists build their own loyal armies within their minds. Habits, routines, clear criteria. Constant adaptability is not about reacting to the environment, but about navigating it without becoming deformed. Those who achieve this untouchability begin to notice something curious. Attacks diminish, provocations cease, games lose their appeal. Not because the world has become kinder, but because it has lost its emotional return. Silence was already pressuring, time was already controlling, the absence of closure was already wearing them down. Now, internal stability closes the cycle. And when the other person can no longer read your reactions, the next layer of protection emerges, the one that transforms you into something even more difficult to control. When someone can easily decipher you, you've already lost an entire layer of protection. Machiavelli understood that in any power game, excessive legibility is weakness. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires recognizing that people observe, catalogue, and anticipate behaviors all the time. The appearance of virtue often confuses transparency with security. The strategist knows that the more predictable you are, the easier it becomes to manipulate your reactions. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve ambiguity. Being strategically illegible is not lying. It's not offering overly clear patterns. Those who cannot be interpreted precisely cannot be led. And this begins with small gestures, not elaborate speeches. In practice, this means varying responses, pace, and levels of exposure. Sometimes you speak more, sometimes less. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you just listen. Decisions based on real human nature recognize that the other person tries to create a mental model of you to predict future actions. Better to be feared than loved, here, means being impossible to anticipate. Avoiding being hated is not about deliberately confusing, but about not giving yourself away completely. In professional environments, for example, not immediately revealing your intentions, plans, or next steps reduces external interference. Calculated use of force is using ambiguity as a shield. Virtù and fortuna align when you realize that not all clarity is a virtue. Some are an invitation to attack. The most refined strategists build their own loyal armies in communication as well. They master what they show and especially what they don't show. Constant adaptability means adjusting the degree of exposure according to the scenario. When the adversary tries to read you and fails repeatedly, frustration, insecurity, and error arise. They begin to act based on assumptions, and assumptions are rarely accurate. Silence, time, broken expectations, and internal stability have already created unstable ground. Now, illegibility closes the circle, and when the other can no longer predict or interpret you, only one final attempt at control remains: accessing your emotions more directly. When emotions become too accessible, they become leverage points for those who want to manipulate you. Machiavelli addressed this with surgical coldness. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, stems from the understanding that exposed emotions are susceptible to exploitation. The strategist doesn't eliminate feelings, he governs them. The appearance of virtue often confuses emotional sincerity with authenticity, but authenticity without control becomes vulnerability. The end justifies the means when the means is to shield one's own internal state. Whoever controls their own emotions deprives the enemy of the raw material for manipulation. Without visible reactions, there is no leverage. Without leverage, there is no control. In practice, this means recognizing emotions without displaying them to the environment. Anger, frustration, and enthusiasm exist, but they don't need to be exhibited. Decisions based on real human nature acknowledge that the other person observes micro-expressions, tone of voice, haste, and hesitation. Better to be feared than loved here means being emotionally stable under pressure. Avoiding being hated doesn't require artificial coldness, but consistency. A simple example: in a public criticism, the strategist maintains a neutral tone, thanks the feedback, and moves on. The internal response comes later, in private. Calculated use of force is choosing when and if to express emotion. Virtù and fortuna meet when self-control becomes a habit, not an effort. Great strategists build their own loyal armies in the emotional realm as well. Regulated sleep, minimal routine, reading that strengthens thought. Books like Machiavelli's The Prince or Marcus Aurelius's Meditations help train this inner posture. Constant adaptability is not about reacting emotionally to every stimulus, but about adjusting the response to the greater objective. When emotions remain inaccessible, the enemy begins to lose interest or commit excesses. Silence, time, illegibility, and internal stability have already undermined previous attempts. Now, without emotional access, little room for maneuver remains. And when this happens, a disturbing realization arises. If someone observes your reactions attentively enough, perhaps it's time to transform observation into something even more strategic. There's a point where reacting ceases to be a mistake and becomes a choice, and that point arises from observation. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not ideals, begins when you stop acting in the dark. Observing is not passivity, it's data collection. The appearance of virtue usually involves acting first and understanding later. The strategist does the opposite, understands first, acts later. The end justifies the means when the means is to know patterns before moving. Every reaction of yours, when observed by others, becomes information. But when you observe without exposing yourself, you transform the behavior of others into a map. Those who observe calmly begin to perceive repetitions, attempts, schedules, triggers. And where there is a pattern, there is predictability of the other, not yours. In practice, this means paying attention to what normally goes unnoticed. Who pushes when they are losing control? Who falls silent when they feel threatened? Who accelerates when they perceive silence? Decisions based on real human nature emerge from this understanding. Better to be feared than loved here means being seen as someone who perceives more than they speak. Avoiding being hated doesn't require invisibility, but discretion. A simple example. In meetings, the strategist notices who talks too much when insecure and who attacks when contradicted. They don't react immediately. They record it. Calculated use of force means using this information only when necessary. Virtù and fortuna align when you realize that knowing the other person's behavior is more valuable than trying to change it. Great strategists build their own armies, loyal also to the trained eye. Constant adaptability is not emotional improvisation. It's adjustment based on prior analysis. When someone already knows your reactions, your future moves cease to be yours. Therefore, observing without exposing yourself preserves freedom. Silence protected, time controlled, broken expectations destabilized, illegibility confused, and self-control shielded. Now observation closes the circle. You act less, but with more precision. And when you realize that almost no one is truly observing, you understand something unsettling. Perhaps true power lies not in acting better, but in being the only one who truly sees the game unfolding. Now, the question that really matters isn't whether this works, it's whether you'll apply it. Because knowledge that doesn't translate into behavior is just sophisticated entertainment. Observe your routine starting today. How many times do you react impulsively? How many times do you readily offer your emotions? How many times do you chase after emergencies that aren't yours? Machiavelli wasn't talking about malice. He was talking about lucidity. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, begins when you choose awareness over automatism. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve your mental autonomy. So test it, silently. Use time to your advantage. Break expectations. Don't close unnecessary narratives. Strategically become unreadable. See what happens when you stop offering free emotional access. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean inspiring fear. It means inspiring respect for your stability. Avoiding being hated isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about not becoming a hostage to other people's emotions. Your own loyal armies begin within your mind, in decisions based on real human nature, repeated with constant adaptability. Now tell me, who has controlled the rhythm of your life so far? You or the reactions of others? In what recent situation do you realize you could have used silence, time, or ambiguity to your advantage? If this resonated with you, write in the comments. Here we learn by thinking, not reacting. And if you want to continue developing this cold, strategic, and applicable reading of human behavior, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and follow the upcoming content. Because once you learn to see the game, pretending you don't see it is no longer an option.